episode of Microgenres, we're going to look at the pre-Romero Haitian zombie movies, meaning zombie movies before Night of the Living Dead that featured zombies connected to voodoo. But let's talk about how and why I came to that decision on this specific selection of movies, and a little bit of history for context. Now, I thought it would be cool to look at all the zombie movies that came out before George Romero redefined the zombie for us. I didn't think that there would be that many, but as it turns out, there were actually a lot of them. All kinds of different ideas of what zombies were. For example, Boris Karloff played a man who comes back from being wrongly executed as a disgruntled corpse. It's not exactly The Walking Dead. There were science fiction zombies from alien planets, but the movies we're discussing today are all derived in their use of the term by its poorly construed idea of what voodoo is and how we were to understand what a zombie is. So I thought that this would be perfect for a small pocket of films for a microgenre. Now, I thought that I could do a video about all the silly, cheesy zombie movies that came out before Night of the Living Dead, and we'd all laugh about how campy they were.
We are laughing.
Yeah, but this leads immediately to our next problem. Racism. Racism! Seriously though, racism is a problem, and it's the center core at all of these movies, so I want to mention that up front. It makes sense. These movies are all filmed before 1968, before Night of the Living Dead comes out, before civil rights, and there's actually a pretty cool little story running through all of these productions, through this like wave of films, and it gives this video an introduction, and then an arc to the films. There's a problem to solve, a hero, and a happy ending. Although, admittedly, I will be casting a white guy as the hero, which is weird. Sorry. You'll see though. But it would be weirder to ignore some of this egregious rake stuff in the movies and just like pretend that it wasn't there at all. In my mind, at least, it's impossible to tell the story of these movies without some, just a smidgen of shameful history. Are you ready? I promise it's not going to take long, so here we go. This is a history on Haiti in less than 2 minutes. Okay? So, in 1492, Columbus sailed the ocean blue and landed in Haiti. He met the nicest islanders called the Taino. These were the indigenous people that were living there, part of the Arawakan Indians. He wrote back to Spain to say that these were the nicest people, so generous, so warm and giving. So on his second trip, he was told to extort the Taino, forcing them to mine for gold every day, and those who refused had their hands cut off. Now, between forced labor and disease, Columbus and Spain wiped out 90% of the less than 100,000 Taino people within 200 years. But then France got a hold of Haiti and wanted to exploit it for its sugar and coffee. And the only problem was that the Spanish had kind of wiped out most of the native Taino people, so they just imported 500,000 African slaves onto an island that originally had less than 100,000 people. The French had Haiti for about 100 years, and then during their own French Revolution, the Haitian people rose up and overthrew their oppressors. Haiti should be seen as a symbol or an avatar for freedom. It was the first black republic, that's the first country to be run by formerly enslaved people. But we don't live in a just world. We live in a world where PDF files become presidents. So a few years after Haiti threw off the shackles of slavery, the former slave owners in France forced Haiti to pay reparations to their former slave owners, an act which crippled Haiti economically, and the Western world has since used Haiti as a punching bag, economically and even rhetorically. They're eating the cats and the dogs of the people that live there. Do you remember that ugly racist bullshit? That's a tentpole of white supremacy. That's what these movies are about. After 300 years of colonization from 1500 to 1800, these people were punished for fighting for their freedom, and predominantly by America that claims rebellion against tyranny for themselves, but kept slaves, kept down the formerly enslaved, and has recently voted in a deranged white supremacist explicitly because he emboldens their own racism. There. That wasn't so bad, was it? 2 minutes. And just one last thought. Keep in mind that Haiti is one island in the Caribbean, but the Dominican Republic, Jamaica, Cuba, the Bahamas, Puerto Rico, they all have their own stories and cultures that were harmed by Western colonialism. And that doesn't even touch on how voodoo is portrayed.
Voodoo? Yes, sir. Witch doctors, aldermen, why the woods is plumb full of them voodoos down where we want.
But we don't have all day. I just wanted to watch these movies and talk about them. So let's just all understand that when we see voodoo in these movies, we're talking about a racist caricature of voodoo for cheap entertainment value, the way The Mummy was done, or witches are often portrayed, and not as authentic, serious cultural practices. Now, let's talk about zombies. If somebody tells you to picture a zombie in your mind, most people are going to think of a George Romero zombie.
But I don't believe that you can turn human beings into automatons, or as you call them, zombies.
In 1968, Night of the Living Dead established the definitive zombie for all others to follow it, right? Romero has made multiple zombie films, none more influential than his first three, Night, Dawn, and Day of the Dead. Resident Evil and Shaun of the Dead are both based directly on the Romero movie rules and aesthetics of the Romero zombie, as does The Walking Dead and like 90% of all zombie movies. But tucked away in that 10% of remaining zombie movies are a small selection that didn't have the benefit of Romero's version to copy off of. There were a small collection of movies, under a dozen, that came out before 1968, before the pop culture landscape and politics had shifted. These are all black and white, released in the 30s and 40s, and most have a runtime that tops out in an hour. So the story of zombies is about race, and I'm going to prove it in this video. So these dead people, right, were resurrected to keep on working on plantations. Slaves, even in death, dead people worked to death and then resurrected to keep on working.
Zombies, the living dead. Corpses taken from their graves, or made to work in sugar mills, in fields at night.
And at other times they're used as instruments for revenge, which is fitting. These are movies made by white people about white slave plantation owners who are deathly afraid of their slaves and pervert their culture to create horror icons, again, like The Mummy. If you want to know more about the history of The Mummy in movies, you can find that in my Cinechronology playlist. Also, like and follow for more content like this. I don't have money for advertising, and I rely on you guys to help show the algorithm that you'd like to see more of my content. So, blippity bloop bloop bloops the buttons. This first wave of zombie movies are exploitative of black culture entirely, and it's embarrassing. Like, really, I could have called this episode Blaxploitation Horror: the prequel chapter. And that doesn't mean that we can't enjoy these movies, or that there aren't genuine horror classics in here, or that there isn't anything but regrettable history to discuss and point out. But it does require a little bit of historical context to fully understand them, right? Okay, now let's get into the movies. White Zombie, 1933. This is the very first zombie movie. It gave birth to a short-lived but well-known sludge metal band in the 90s. This story follows that Dracula template of the vulnerable white lady being seduced by our supernatural villain, being mesmerized, and the Dracula connection is also backed up by having Bela Lugosi play our zombie master, Murder Legendre, whose piercing eyes hypnotize his victims. He explains that his army of zombies were all turned from his enemies into mindless slaves. Now, this movie isn't as offensive by much, not as much as others on this list, but the voodoo exploitation is there. The movie takes place in Haiti, and Legendre is a plantation owner. White Zombie is based off of a book titled Magic Island by William Seabrook, which is also credited as the first book to bring the idea of the voodoo zombie to the public consciousness. Seabrook had traveled to Haiti and claims that he witnessed everything he had written about, everything being, quote, rituals that involved drinking blood, the transferring of souls, and resurrection, end quote. So zombies, sorcery, and cannibalism. And that would be damning enough if it weren't for the totality of the man's life, which includes a previous book only 2 years earlier in the same fashion, denigrating the Middle Eastern cultures, titled Adventures in Arabia, among the Bedouins, Druses, whirling dervishes, and Yazidi devil worshippers. Catchy title. It also puts a dent in his credibility and decency, not because he checked into a mental health facility for alcoholism, although the alcoholism might be a credibility factor when being trusted to witness events objectively, but because he exploited his time in the mental hospital for another book called Asylum. Plus, he was divorced multiple times over claims of sadism, his problems with addiction, and he also seemed quite proud to have partaken in cannibalism, which sounds to me like a bunch of hokum and maybe some red flags, but he was proudly telling people he had purposely bribed a medical intern to give him a chunk of human flesh and that he ate it. So, it sounds to me like he's the zombie. Anyway, Seabrook's books sold well in the 1920s because they were really racist in the 20s, and his book was well received by a public that might not have been feeling too good about the current US forces occupying Haiti. The book would sow seeds in the reader's mind and give them a reason to think less of the island savages. You know, the oldest racist trick, convincing poor white man that he's better than the poorest black man so he lets you pick his pocket. Or, in 2024, he would just say, they're eating the dogs and the cats. It's the same pile of shit, same racism. But hey, if you can put all that aside, you've got yourself a neat little film. I think all of these movies benefit from the exotic jungle locale like the creature from the Black Lagoon and almost Indiana Jones or Casablanca-like sense of adventure, but tinged to a gothic horror movie. Cemeteries and crosses and corpses and horse-drawn carriages with damsels in distress, stone castles, the whole bag of tricks. Revolt of the Zombies in 1936. This was supposed to be a sequel to White Zombie. But this is also like a bird of a different feather, sort of. I don't know. Same different feather on the wing of the same racist bird. I'm not even sure that there are any black people in the entire movie and no voodoo at all. Instead, we're picking on Cambodians this time, and while they are zombies, they are mind-controlled living people, and this becomes useful for bloody endeavors like war. Now you can march your soldiers into the hail of bullets and they won't scream or retreat.
Now look, Cliff. Tiong here comes from Angkor, where according to their legends, Angkor was built for these robots. Thousands of tireless, feelingless human machines.
Yes, I know, and they call them zombies.
Controlled and directed mentally by their priest king.
Yes, and Tiong here is the last descendant of that priest king and the only man alive that knows the secret of the zombie.
This is an oddity on the list, but it matches most of the themes of these other movies, the dark magic of the savage natives, and so while it isn't Haitian in any way, its connection as a pseudo-sequel to White Zombie gets it a mention. Plus the time that it was made, lots of black and white, similar time frame for the length of the movie. And also, Bela Lugosi returns for this sorta sequel, sorta. Like, it's just his eyes, actually, that are superimposed on the screen in that charming 1950s dissolve that's so cliched now. Uwanga, 1936. This was a tough watch. It's really old and the copy I saw was quite poor, but also the plot's a little janky. There are two plantation owners. One is a half-black woman named Cleely Gordon. She's in love with the second plantation owner, a white guy who likes her but won't get involved with her because of miscegenation. So she goes all voodoo on him and sends a small army of the recently dead to go kill his fiancée. It's not complicated, but it's part of a very complicated history. So for example, while we should be celebrating one of the earliest zombie movies, instead we gotta talk about all this crap. Uwanga isn't remembered all that fondly, in some part due to the uncomfortable feeling watching it in retrospect, but admittedly also the performances have been criticized. But we can't chalk this up to low-quality performers. Like, Cleely herself was portrayed by Freddie Washington, who starred in Imitation of Life in 1934, which was nominated for an Academy Award. And Washington herself is an impressive figure in film history, being one of the earliest black actors recognized in her time. She was involved in the civil rights movement for decades after retiring from acting. It's hard to escape race in this story, right? Like, the movie she made before Uwanga was a half-black woman trying to pass for white in a society to get a better shot at opportunities. The movies she made right after Uwanga, she plays a black mother raising a white child. And right in between them, Uwanga, a movie about a black woman desiring a white man so badly she turns into an evil murderess. And then, of course, we get this amazing movie poster. I mean, come on. So, yes, it was also sold as Love Wanga, and the tagline. One last super weird point of interest. The movie was made in 1936, but wasn't released until 1942, which is a little weird because surely it would have been received better in the 30s than a decade later when these movies were already falling out of favor. But in the 6 years before its release, it was remade as The Devil's Daughter in 1939, beating its predecessor to the silver screen by 3 years. The remake is also just under an hour long, and there is very little zombie action. This is much tamer and more of a melodrama than a horror movie, which is why we're not really covering it, aside to mention it here.
Just wait till you see the zombies.
Zombies? What's them?
Dead folks. What walks around.
They does? Here?
Especially here.
King of the Zombies, 1941. This starts off very familiar to The Most Dangerous Game, with our heroes crash landing on an island with only one house with a creepy Eurotrash villain in it. But instead of the reveal being that their host hunts humans, it's now that he keeps zombies. The plot is about a young nurse who accepts a job taking care of a patient in the Caribbean, the island of St. Sebastian. The patient in question is a near catatonic who's very much like a zombie. The main problem that I see is not being able to maintain suspense. We learn there are zombies in the first 20 minutes, but then watch everybody keep hanging out and making very little progress on their escape, and then taking a painful amount of time figuring out what's going on.
Your servant seems to have learned a lot in the short time he has been here.
Nothing I ain't willing to unlearn just as quick.
I'm afraid Jeff's been saying things.
Ain't it the truth?
And in that regard, the best part of the film, in my opinion, is Jeff, played by Manton Moreland.
Boy, I was petrified. Where there's light, there's hope. Boy, I need all the hopes that I can dig up tonight.
He kind of reminded me of Bernie Mac. He's sharp and funny, playing the two white lead servant. It's pretty racist, and he plays dumb to the two white heroes, even though he also brings them all the information and learns it first and warns them.
Oh, zombies! Mr. Bill, let's get out of here. Why, this place is a walking cemetery.
Wait a minute, Jeff. What's this all about? What's a zombie?
This is obviously part of the time when the movie was made, but there isn't much zombie action going on throughout. Again, the focus is on the romance. Bela Lugosi was offered the part of the mad scientist again, but he was busy working on other projects.
Who is they? Who is they?
Zombies?
Wow!
I Walked with a Zombie, 1943. Now, as far as these movies go, I Walked with a Zombie has been regarded as more respectful than others, claimed to be more authentic, with more research of the Haitian culture, and it's been fondly remembered by fans over the years, cultivating decent online ratings and reviews to this day.
And the enormous boat brought the long-ago fathers and the long-ago mothers of us all chained to the bottom of the boat.
They brought you to a beautiful place, didn't they?
If you say, miss, if you say.
The movie leans further into the romance angle, with many people citing its borrowing from the plot of Jane Eyre. I can't really speak to that, but I think the performances are all pretty good and the atmosphere is effectively haunting.
Just what is a zombie?
A ghost, a living dead. It's also a drink.
There aren't many zombies to speak of, and the idea of the plot is really more in exploring if zombies are real and whether or not our protagonist nurse's boss's wife had been turned into the Walking Dead. The themes of free will and slavery are alluded to throughout, and an almost Alfred Hitchcock-like ambiguity in whether or not her husband zombified his wife to keep her from leaving him. Val Lewton and Jacques Turner worked together on this film, the second of 3 that they made, including the previous Cat People, which is also a cult favorite, in case you're interested. The Mad Ghoul, 1943. Now, another movie lacking many zombies is The Mad Ghoul. It's got a simple and dastardly premise. Mad Doctor decides to steal his lab assistant's girlfriend away from him by experimenting on him with a nerve gas used by native Mayans, turning his rival into a zombie. Now, Mayans aren't Haitians, but the bigotry of representing Aboriginal peoples as savages is there for sure. The cast brings weight to the silly premise, and that kind of holds the movie together. The zombified victim isn't always a zombie, but instead is triggered into having spells. There are no plantations, but the mechanics of zombification is the same as was the sequel to White Zombie, Revolt of the Zombies, moving the ethnicity of the primitives to Cambodia. I thought about leaving this title off the list, but I really don't know where else it would belong. The only other spot I thought might have been with science fiction zombies, but the origins of the nerve gas bring us back to the intentional degrading and demonizing of less developed countries or less westernized countries. I couldn't argue with anybody who didn't think it belongs on this list, but it's nice to have a break from the plantation movies, and I'm including it for my sense of completion here. Revenge of the Zombies, 1943. This is seen as a pseudo-sequel to King of the Zombies because the plot elements are similar, the mad scientist with the zombie wife, as well as the return of Madame Sute-Wan and Manton Moreland playing Jeff again.
I thank you, but I got to go home. I forgot something.
What you forget?
I forgot to stay there. What was that?
Just a zombie.
Just a zombie?
Moreland had an impressive career of over 130 movies, and despite literally surrounding myself with thousands of movies, I've only seen a couple of his. He lived through the most racist time in Hollywood, and as attitudes changed by the end of the 40s, incredibly, Manton's work represented something uncomfortable for people, and so rather than allowing him to benefit from doors opening, they just stopped hiring him as much. How crappy is that? Like, for years, his movie was shunned as an embarrassment, even though he was a pioneer and had little choice but to work in that system. I don't know about you, but I don't blame the powerless. And in that same vein, Madame Sutewan, who was also returning from King of the Zombies, had her own career with terrible highlights like Birth of a Nation, the KKK recruitment video, but also Mighty Joe Young as a servant. I mean, in a world with so much prejudice, and given her options, she too was a pioneer who deserves better than being blamed for the decisions of rich white men. Also worth noting that the 40s zombie movies weren't as reliant on the salacious intrigue that zombies themselves used to provide. In Zombie Movies, The Ultimate Guide by Glenn Kay, it says, quote, "The movie reflects an attitude common to the period, the notion that The Walking Dead alone weren't meaty enough to sustain a feature. Interestingly, the studios felt compelled to use zombies as subplots in larger stories, which often involved Nazi spies, mad doctors, mobsters, and ridiculous schemes to take over the world." End quote. I think I'm okay with that. First of all, it precedes our own current crossover genre era where franchises need to combine in order to create cinematic universes. But also, why not make some actual villains like the Nazis into villains if you're going to smear actual indigenous people? This is also a case, maybe the first time, I'm seeing both black and white people in the movie used as zombie drones. See? Progress?
I've seen people act like that in pictures. What do they call them, zombies or something?
No, honey, there aren't any such people. That's only a scenario writer's nightmare. I know, I wrote one once.
Voodoo Man, 1944. Bela Lugosi returns to the genre again to play a voodoo priest mad scientist who's trying to get his comatose wife back by kidnapping young women and using voodoo to siphon off their life force. Much like The Mad Ghoul, this movie is a bit light on the voodoo angle. There are no black people in it, and the most of the voodoo stuff that's in it is like a couple skulls and a bit of rope that ties itself. The plot feels like House of a Thousand Corpses, where the gas station guy is helping out the deranged doctor with his abductions, misleading them to their inevitable zombification. The zombies are really more of the mind-controlled or hypnotized variety.
Your will to live. Your mind.
Oh, no. No. Don't look at me like that.
And this is now the third of 5 appearances of Bela Lugosi on the list, but it isn't the last. And also, George Zucco, who played the mad scientist in The Mad Ghoul, returned to play the Captain Spaulding role, the guy running the gas station who misleads young ladies and sending them to Bela Lugosi. The movie was originally titled Tiger Man and was changed to Voodoo Man, which should say something as to how integral voodoo was to the plot. I like this movie a fair bit, despite there not being many zombies. The main character is a screenwriter who's going to pitch this as a movie called Voodoo Man by the end, giving us a little like meta-textual japery. It's silly, and it never gets too heavy, despite the disturbing subject matter.
There you are, boss. There's your horror story.
The Voodoo Man, eh? Is it any good?
Well, I don't know about that, but don't tell me it couldn't happen, because it did. Didn't it, honey?
It certainly did.
And another thing, I'm starting my vacation right now. See you in 2 weeks. Come on, honey.
Bye. Who do you see play the part of the Voodoo Man?
Say, why don't you try to get that actor, Bela Lugosi? It's right up his alley.
But do you know what zombies are?
Oh, I don't. I'm not too sure. Me neither.
They are the living dead.
And speaking of which, Zombies on Broadway, 1945. We get our first intentional comedy with Zombies on Broadway in 1945 about two PR guys who need a real-life zombie to fulfill the promise advertised in the flyers they dropped over the city for a new club called the Zombie Hut. I love the idea that somebody would think it's a great idea for a club to be called the Zombie Hut, let alone trying to bring people in by saying you have an actual zombie for them to see.
Zombies.
Zombies?
Uh-huh.
Zombies.
Bela Lugosi is also returning to play the now standard mad scientist bent on zombifying women. This is the fourth movie on our list to feature Lugosi.
How can the natives do with their silly voodoo what I cannot accomplish by scientific means?
Perhaps because a zombie is something of the devil, not of science, Doctor.
Nonsense, nonsense!
Our two leads are a comedy duo in the style of Abbott and Costello, Alan Carney and Willie Brown. They've got a nice rapport and some cute gags, so if you liked the Abbott and Costello Meet the Universal Monster movies, then you might like this. Like, this is Abbott and Costello Meet the Zombies. Well, zombie singular, really. But he is an impressive lumbering Hulk, almost Frankenstein-like, and they do the prosthetic bug eyes, that like style, which just looks nuts. As if this comedy entry into the genre wasn't enough of an indication on its own, I should point out the further we get from the 30s, the more tame the material becomes. A few decades after its inception, as we head towards the era of civil rights, explicit racism becomes more casual racism and less venomous, but carrying many of the same tropes, now played for cheap laughs instead of fear. I mean, it's got a monkey. It's a movie with a monkey. It's got a monkey in it. Can't deny a movie with a monkey. Voodoo Woman, 1957. We had a voodoo man, so why not a voodoo woman, right? In this movie, a man and a woman, a couple of scam artists, get wind of a treasure of gold. They kill the man who has the map and go into the jungle. There they meet another white man who's trying to harness the voodoo powers to make a superhuman by experimenting on the native people of the village. But instead, he makes a monster. What I like about this movie is how they invert the cliche of the darkest hearts of the primitive tribes people doing voodoo, and instead the hearts of darkness are all the white characters, not just the one mad scientist, murdering for gold, exploiting the indigenous jungle people and experimenting on them, trying to create a super soldier in the hope of creating a race of slaves, most of which at least has historical precedent. So even though the depiction of the natives is still an offensive caricature, doing human sacrifices and magic, the ill intent and the antagonists of the film are the white people. Now, these weren't some innocents seduced by the predatory voodoo sorcerers or whatever bullshit they're usually selling. These are some murderous bastards and monstrous-ass white people. To be fair, the witch doctor also seems like a disreputable swine for going along with all this stuff, but that was already par for the course in the earlier films as well. And none of the tribe's people have any character either. They just dance and chant to the rituals. Not having any black characters is not great, but at least here it's the bad white people who are the antagonists. The movie has since been claimed that it was remade for TV in 1966 and retitled as Curse of the Swamp Creature. The director has said his work is original, but in any case, while there is voodoo in it, there are no zombies. It's the only movie on this list not in black and white, and it's also sleazier than I would have expected a TV movie to be in the 60s. It's grungy and cheapy, but it's weird enough to be a fun watch, but just with no zombies.
Well, darling, still using that vivid imagination of yours? Don't worry. Everything will be much better very soon.
Voodoo Island, 1957. Featuring not Bela Lugosi, but his movie monster contemporary Boris Karloff, as well as Alicia Cook, whose name wouldn't be familiar to most, but if you've seen any of the most important film noir of the 1940s, then you know the face. The movie's about land developers looking to make a new resort, but basically end up on Zombie Island. All told, I don't think this is a very successful horror movie and is more of an adventure movie. If you're looking for zombies and murders, you're likely to be bored, but if you want to follow a cadre of Americans into exotic jungles and boats seeking treasure, then you might be more forgiving. There are a few especially cheesy plastic plant monsters that only in the last 15 minutes that kills a lady while she's swimming and then attacks others. One eats a small child whole. That was kind of fun. If I had known, I would have included this movie in my microgenre on killer plants, which you can find in my microgenre playlist. What there isn't any of are zombies. Only the last 10 minutes and the first few minutes have a zombified or mesmerized person to help it qualify for our list here today. Adam West has his very first role ever of his career in Voodoo Island, but it's almost not worth mentioning as he's only shown in a bit part in the first 12 minutes. Even pre-Batman, West can't help but be himself.
You must have shorted out somewhere in that thing. And if you can't get it fixed, we'll send up carrier pigeons with a weather report.
Plan 9 from Outer Space, 1959. This is the biggest impact on pop culture that cult B-movie legend Ed Wood ever had. It's been referenced in Seinfeld.
It's just a movie.
Just a movie? You don't understand. This isn't plans 1 through 8 from outer space. This is plan 9. This is the one that worked. The worst movie ever made.
It's a favorite of Penn and Teller.
People trash movies like Plan 9 for everything, for lack of continuity, bad acting, cheap sets. But I will tell you, I will take a week's worth of Plan 9 over one viewing of anything ever made by Merchant Ivory. I have seen Plan 9 from Outer Space 7 times. Personally, I am not kidding. And who do you know who has seen A Passage to India more than once except the director?
And it even has a movie about the making of it, directed by Tim Burton, called Ed Wood. This is Bela Lugosi's last credit, and not just on this list. Plan 9 is Lugosi's last role ever. He passes away near the start of production and is replaced by Wood's accountant, who spends the rest of the movie running around with his face covered up. Plan 9 is renowned as being one of the worst movies ever made, and it's easy to see why. The sets, the special effects, and nonsensical plot is all fair game. I just think he needed a good script, or like a better script. Wood's enthusiasm to just improvise and try to cut it together in editing is pretty clumsy. Exposition given by a narrator to glue scenes together that have no connective tissue otherwise, it's clunky and unfortunate. What you should really watch is Ed Wood, one of Tim Burton's finest films about the making of Plan 9, which gives you the context of how and why this is Lugosi's last role in this film. And if you're going to seek out the original film, Plan 9 from Outer Space, I hope you see the Monster Vision rip with Penn and Teller hosting it as security guards. For our purposes here today, we're really only looking at one character from this film, who is the zombie. The Mighty Tor. Other than that, there really isn't that much connection, but it is the last on our list, which is unfortunate. So let me throw in one more non-zombie movie that sort of belongs here.
You've a fine husband, a beautiful child. She looks just as you did before that black woman Ruva got hold of you and filled you with the sound of the drums and the sight of blood, poisoned you with the voodoo.
Black Moon in 1934, it gets an honorable mention, both for it having all the same genre elements, the voodoo, the white woman in peril from the savage natives and all that, but just short of actual zombies, but poster also insinuating or evoking zombies with these hands on it. And Fay Wray from King Kong and the Most Dangerous Game is also the star, which is pretty cool. I used some clips in this video from this movie as well, so it only seemed right to include it briefly.
Now, merely consider this. We have 5 whites. 2 of them are women and 1 is a helpless child. And around us are 2,000 blacks. Fully 3/4 of these are hill bandits, fugitives from Haiti.
So aside from the dehumanizing propagandistic elements of the films, what have we learned? Well, I think Bela Lugosi is sort of like a main icon in these movies, or a main player, as he was featured in 5 of them. White Zombie, Revolt of the Zombies, just his eyes in that, Voodoo Man, Zombies on Broadway, and Plan 9 from Outer Space. And most of these movies, as I mentioned, are about an hour long, all are black and white, just not just the racial element, like black and white films. Oh yeah, I also said that there was a hero of the zombie genre who saves the entire thing, and no, it's not Bela Lugosi. It's George Romero. I kind of gave it away at the start, if you were paying attention. With one movie, The Night of the Living Dead, he redefined the zombie genre and expunged the problematic voodoo angle. His film all but erased the older zombie movies from most people's minds, and best yet, he uses his film to humanize his lead actor of the film and expose bigotry. Romero used his opportunity making a film to add valuable social commentary. His influence was so great, he's the reason I didn't even think about the racist implications and conditions of the zombie movies that preceded him. He's a true legend. Have you seen any of these movies before? Did you like any of them? Did you want to expose yourself as a bigot by arguing in the comments how offended you are at my pointing out historical realities? Or did you just want to complain that you didn't want to hear about politics and just tuned in for zombie movies? Tough. Politics is literally about everything, okay? So if that's how you feel, just keep on walking. And for everybody else, thank you for watching. I appreciate your time so much, and I will be back next week.